Hi everyone, I'm Ashley from Sandalwood Signs, and today we are going to be making this simple mountain mosaic.
So the first thing we're going to do is cut our backer. I have some 1/2-inch plywood here, and I'm going to use my table saw to cut an 18 by 22 inch piece. Now that we have our backer cut, we're going to grab some pieces that we're going to use for our mountain. I'm using some furring strips for these mountains today, and we're going to cut them at a 45-degree angle. With those two pieces, you're going to place your first mountain. This is a personal preference. Figure out where you would like your two mountains to go, and these will be your guide for creating the rest of the mountain. I like to draw with a pencil where the mountains will go in case some of the pieces get moved. You can then cut a bunch of pieces at a 45-degree angle to make the rest of your mountain. You're going to notice that I leave a little bit of an overhang at the bottom, and that's okay because we're going to trim off all of the edges at the very end.
Okay, so since I have my mountains made, I have them placed how I want them to, and they are all lined up and nice and tight. I'm going to give them a rough hand sand because these are, you know, rustic mosaic mountains. So I'm going to round the edges, and I think it just gives it a nice little touch. So let's get going. Okay, everything's all sanded down. I'm now going to go ahead and glue and nail these down. I'm just going to be using the pin nailer. I find that that is the best thing for these because it leaves like the tiniest little holes. Cover up later if you want to. Sometimes I leave it for a rustic look. But I'm going to use some wood glue and then get these pinned down.
Make sure to grab pins for your pin nailer that are short enough to not go through the backer, but long enough to make sure your pieces are nice and secure, especially with the added wood glue strength. It's time to stain the mountains.
Okay, so see here, I kind of left the tops open so we can go ahead and get that white on it. Now, whenever I choose my white paint, you can choose maybe an off-white or you can choose a stark white. I kind of like the stark white. I think it looks really good for snow-capped mountains, but I also really like using either a milk paint or a chalk paint or just a really matte, thick paint. I think that it goes over the stain because you are going to brush it on just a little bit over here, but I think it just goes on really, really well.
I recommend waiting 24 hours for the stain to cure for you to put the paint on.
Okay, so I have my snow caps on. Everything is stained and it is pinned to the board and glued to the board. So now we're going to create the back sky. If you are a beginner and don't want to do all of the measuring, then you could have painted this black and maybe add some speckles or a little moon before we even put the mountains on, and then you're ready to frame. I'm gonna go ahead and cut all of the pieces, but we're gonna make it go this way. I'm going to over measure, then I can cut down. So that's kind of the biggest tip for when you're making mosaics is cut a little bit before your measured line. Then if you are off, you could always make it a little bit smaller. That will save you a lot of headaches. Okay, as far as the mountain tips, whenever you get to them, there's a couple ways you could do it. You could line your piece up with your already mitered edge and then go ahead and chop it so they both kind of line up like that. Or what I did over here is I took it to my scroll saw and I just kind of notched out that little part right there. I'm gonna go ahead and do the notching with my scroll saw because I think it just kind of looks a little bit nicer, but whatever level you are on, whatever you feel comfortable with, either will work, and I think either will look great. Okay, so now that we have our sky cut out, we are gonna decide what kind of sky we're looking for. You could just paint all of these or stain all of these black, or you can take them all off, kind of spray paint them and give them like a blended effect. You could do pink skies, you could do orange skies. There's whatever kind of sky you would like. So I'm going to ponder over what paints I already have and go ahead and probably going to spray paint these just to give it kind of a blended effect. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that and then we'll be ready to cut. So here I have my paint drying, and what I did is I took a midnight blue, very dark blue, and sprayed from this angle to create kind of like a midnight blue, like the sun is setting or the sun has set quite a while ago kind of hue. And then I went around on the other side and I sprayed black from this direction. So it kind of creates a bit of an ombre effect, and I think it's going to look great once we get them all tacked together.
Once your pieces are dry, we're going to glue the entire night sky down before pinning. So I'd like to glue and place everything first, make sure everything is fitted before I go ahead and pin them down. Okay, it's now time to trim off the excess overhang, and there's so many different ways you can do this, so choose what you feel comfortable with. You could use your table saw, a circular saw, or a router. It's now time to create the starry sky. So I'm going to use the same paint that I used for the tips of my mountains, and I have a special brush that I use every single time for this, and I never clean it off. So it gets really stiff at the end, and it's perfect for creating this starry sky.
Okay, we're ready to frame. Everything is dry, everything is glued and nailed down and trimmed off on the edge. So whenever we go to make our frames, there's a bunch of different ways that we can do this. I really like to make rabbited frames for my artwork. I think it creates just a little bit more timeless piece, and I think it looks a little bit more elegant. So for the wood, I had some 1x8 laying around the shop, and I thought that that would be just fine since we're gonna stain it to match the mountains. I measured at about 1.25 inches, and that's how thick I cut my strips. So I have 4 strips, all the same height, and I gave myself plenty of room because these are going to have mitered edges as well. So make sure whenever you're making your cuts, you give yourselves plenty of room. We are going to take the guard off of the table saw now because we are going to run this through right on top of the blade to create those rabbits. Okay, when I make my first cut, I am going to set my blade to the height of my artwork. So I'm going to go ahead and bring this over to my table saw, and I am going to set it just a hair over the artwork to where you can see the blade sticking up just a little bit. Working with the machine being off and unplugged, we are going to lower this blade down to where you can barely see it poking over. So we're going to lower it down, 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 down to where it is barely peeking over there. We are going to make our cut, and what's going to happen is it's not going to go all the way through. So whenever we make our second cut, it's going to fit just snugly right over our art piece. So when I'm running it through the board, I'm gonna go ahead and I'm going to try and line it up. Again, my machine is off at the moment just so I can show you this, but I'm gonna try and run it, just eyeball it to where my fence is set to where my blade is gonna be cutting right in the middle of my piece. So this is what it looks like whenever you make your first cut.
An important tip is to not move your fence and make all of your cuts at the same time.
All right, in order for this to sit on top of our mosaic here, we need to make sure that we are cutting this notch out. So I'm going to take this over to the machine, and I'm going to reset the blade to where it's going to be cutting right here so our board can slip right on top.
We're going to go ahead and do that for all 4 pieces. We are now going to miter the edges. When you are measuring for your miters, I would measure the inside piece so it is the length of your art board, and then make sure you are cutting way before your line so you can trim off your excess. Line up your pieces, and if your miters look great, you can go ahead and stain them, and we're going to put some glue on the inside of all of your frames. These need to be clamped down, so you can use a strap clamp like I have, or if you have any 90-degree clamps, or you can get creative. The last thing we're going to do is flip our sign over and go ahead and put some finish nails at the very edge, and since we have rabbited frames, you will not be able to see them. And now you can throw a coat of polyacrylic over the top of it to protect it, and our mountain is complete. Thank you so much for creating with me today, and I hope it inspires you to create your own wood art.